So, if you have been paying attention to comic book news, you would know that for the last 3 months, Marvel has been putting out free trades. Some of them have been classic stories like Avengers Kree Skull War or the Dark Phoenix saga. Others have been first volumes of recent stuff like Captain America Sam Wilson's first volume or Miss Marvel No Normal, the first volume of the Kamala Khan Miss Marvel. One interesting exception to this is the topic of this video, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther. The exception here being that, as of this video's release, the first 3 volumes of Coates' work has been released, giving a decent idea of what the writer envisions for T'Challa. There are also some supplementary stuff like Black Panther and the Crew and the World of Wakanda, but I'm focusing only on the main series for the sake of this video. So, the first volume deals with T'Challa having to deal with 2 different revolutions on 2 different fronts. On one hand, 2 former Dora Milaje, Io and Aneka, have left the service of the Black Panther and have formed a group calling themselves the Midnight Angels, who demand that Wakanda should not be led by no one man. The other more dangerous threat is being led by a man called Tetu, who feels that the strong should no longer exploit the weak, as inspired by the teachings of Changamire, a Wakandan scholar. Unfortunately, he has decided to take a much more militaristic approach to getting that revolution. He is assisted by another Wakandan character called Zenzi, who exploits the weaknesses in men's hearts. These make for very interesting characters. And all in all, I do think that the first volume is really, really good. And I do recommend it. And compared to the other recent stuff, free trades that Marvel put out, this one actually has a complete story. So Marvel could have pretty much stopped putting out the rest of the trades and I would have had a very satisfactory story because the story ends in a very satisfactory manner. The second volume, I personally didn't like as much. There are some good points in it. I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about the good and bad more separately in a minute. But for the now, I think it's a bit of a drop from the first volume. But then we reached the third volume, The Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda. And this volume is amazing. The basic concept is somehow, as the name suggests, Wakanda has managed to establish an empire for itself. And we see various characters like N'Jataka and Nakia and Mbuku. We also find out later that these are not in fact the original characters, but the names given to certain characters, like the way you would name your child after a famous celebrity. Similarly, our protagonist here is given the name T'Challa, after the famous Black Panther. But as the story progresses, it becomes increasingly clear that this is in fact the main universe's T'Challa. How did this happen? How did we get here? It's an interesting story. And this one is really, really good. Now, there are some flaws with Ta-Nehisi Coates' work. More importantly, because Marvel also put out a free trade of Christopher Priest's Black Panther, widely considered to be the best in all of Black Panther's work. Where in that story, T'Challa is, for the lack of a better word, a chess master. He plans out every single move. Not all of his plans always work, but you can see the thinking with which he approaches every single problem. In Coates' work, he seems to be a bit more of a reactionary. He is reacting to problems as they're presented to him. One other issue is that people seem to be very willing to blame T'Challa for everything. saying that he prioritizes the outside world over Wakanda, except the threats that he were involved in would have meant the destruction of the entire world, which also happens to include Wakanda. And at the same time, very few people actually decide to bring their problems up to T'Challa directly, claiming that he wouldn't understand or his father would do something differently and blah de blah de blah. Basically, a little bit of discussion may have worked, but at the same time, it can be inferred that T'Challa would not have taken all the steps necessary if not for the fact that this revolution sort of pushed him in this direction. There are a few things that I didn't like. I didn't like that Shuri basically went from being an impulsive but very ambitious character who wanted to be both queen and the Black Panther, and sort of is turned into a wise spiritual figure. I didn't like that change much. Most of the outside Marvel world who sort of comes in here is superfluous, and I really don't like them as much, both the heroes and the villains. The one exception is surprisingly in the second volume, where the villain Thunderball, he's a member of the Wrecking Crew, laments the fact that he used to be a gifted gamma scientist before he decided to become, a guy who charges around bashing things with a wrecking ball. T'Challa gives him a chance to redeem himself, albeit as a bit of a boxed crook. So there is that going for him. Also, the second volume, the reason I don't like it as much is because a random villain shows up, a random X-Men villain calling himself... Well, I'm not saying that. If you want to read it, I shouldn't spoil it for you. He's the main villain. There's also a bit of Storm in this entire series, and T'Challa and Storm's relationship is explored again. Some people who like it will like it, some people who hate it will hate it. I really didn't have a lot of feelings about it. The third volume, The Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda, because of its connections and because Ta-Nehisi is telling a very long story, the plot, it actually retroactively makes the second volume good by taking points from it and applying it here. So kudos to the writer again. All in all, I think that this is a very good series. One worth deciding to just go through on your own. So that's pretty much it for this video. I think I've rambled on a bit too long than usual. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like if you like the video. Leave a comment on what you think of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther. What do you think it's better than Christopher Priest's work or not? And subscribe to my channel if you haven't already.